Good morning and welcome to the Sunday session. 27th of April 2026. Today we have Rob Heatherington from WA, Russell Young from the Darling Downs near Dalby, and Kevin Elmy from, I'm not sure whether he's in Alberta or Saskatchewan. He moves around a little bit. Western Canada anyway. So welcome everybody. Welcome to the members. I'll just bring up the chat so that I can see if everybody's asking any questions. Okay, so today we're talking about the principle of ground cover. Hand in hand with that, for me, with my language session, comes profitable or prosperous. Now, this is where I have my opinion about it. It might not be written in stone, but I just want to sort of talk about it so that it activates your brain and helps you to think outside the box. So the difference between profit and prosperous. Profit, I would say, majority of the things can be measured, so it's more objective, whereas prosperous is more subjective because it's to deal with wealth, and so it's how you perceive your wealth. There are 4 different parts. So your health, the money, your environment, and that doesn't necessarily mean your ecosystem and your farm. It can also mean your home life as well. So whatever environment that you live in, and time. Those 4 things work together and there's a synergy between them. So you might find that at one point in your life, you are more focused on money. So if you think of a circle and a pie chart, your money might be 75%. So that's where your focus is. And then the other 3 take up a smaller amount of your pie. If you have just fallen over and had a breakdown like I did when I was 41, majority of that circle is to do with health, because that was the only way that I was going to get back on my feet, was to really focus on health. So the overwhelm comes when everybody thinks you've got to be 100% on health, 100% on money, 100% environment, 100% time. It's too much. So you have to break it down and you have to have a synergy, and it's like a sliding scale as well. So you can have health now, for me, is a lot less important and money is more important, only because I have my health back. It doesn't mean to say that it's not important, because it is. To be prosperous is when you include your feelings. And prosperity is actually far more than wealth. It is when people have the opportunity and freedom to thrive. So you need to ask yourself, are you surviving or are you thriving? And the whole point of Farming Revolution is to make sure and to encourage people to actually take that step where they're no longer surviving, they're actually thriving and their business is doing really well. And then all 4 of the profit side of things is going to just step up with that prosperous side of your life. Now then, with this, we are going to move on to a video where Russell is, well, anybody can interject, but Russell's going to sort of talk about when he harvested the multi-species and the monoculture. And I've just got like 4.5 minutes of the video. So the video has no sound, Russell, but you just need to talk through it. And then if anybody else wants to, have a little bit of a say and what it looks like and what's going on. What I would like you to do, though, Russell, is just target those things with profit. So how was it with both compared? How did they both compare with the time aspect? Was the monoculture easier or was the multi-species easier? How much of financially were they sort of competitive, or was the multi-species a lot less in the pocket? You didn't have to spend so much on inputs. What's the other ones? Your health. How did you feel about? So that was more like the prosperous thing. Was it enjoyable? Which one? I know one, sort of jumped in and out the cab a fair bit. And then the other one is the environment. Did you see any good impacts on the environment? And a classic is the worm count and sort of things like that. And then the quality of your yield. Was the yield higher, but was the quality better depending on which one you harvested? All right, so I'm just going to pull up this video, and what will happen is it will just be on full screen and we can just talk. So over to you, Russell. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, all good, Tamzin. Thank you, and good morning to everyone on the call this morning. So yeah, this was in planted late this crop late 2021, harvested in 2022. So 2022 was an exceptionally wet year for us and presented obviously a lot of problems. And I guess first and foremost was establishing this crop was very difficult. So it had gone in on the back of a winter crop that was roller crimped. And then when we didn't actually get any rain. They were forecasting rain and we planted it dry. There was rain coming. I've never planted dry ever before in my life. And basically the rain didn't come. So a bit of a failure there, but we did get some up. And then I turned around later on when we did get some decent rain and replanted it. I used the summer planter for the one operation and the winter planter for the other. So I didn't actually destroy all of the plants that were planted in that first establishment or that did get going. I just went beside them with the other combination. So yeah, look, that particular paddock there, it yielded where it yielded 7 tonne off a set area, the monoculture yielded 10 tonne off the same area. So that's the monoculture there, all fallen over and twisted up. So there definitely was a yield difference, but not majorly. I mean, input wise, we didn't fertilise or anything that other the multi-species paddock where I did fertilise this. So yeah, yes, probably financially not a great difference in that 7 to 10 tonne difference in the yield. A little bit hard to compare. Well, certainly planting wise, obviously similar costs. I don't see any cost differences whether you're planting in a multi-species paddock or a bare fallow or whatever, or it's to measure its very small amounts of difference. But certainly to harvest it, I had a lot of trouble in the monoculture. Partially because we had a really bad storm had come through, and there's probably I don't know 600 or 700 meters difference in the distance between the paddocks on the property, and certainly to the west, which was where the monoculture was, got absolutely hammered. Where as the storm moved through, it didn't impact down by the houses and where that particular crop that we're harvesting there right now with the green in it, it didn't get the wind and the damage that was further up the paddock. So it's a bit hard to compare, but basically the multi-species stood up very well and the monoculture didn't. It all fell over. It was twisted up. It was a mess to harvest. I had constant chokes because bear in mind, I mean, that crop, you know, the monoculture was about 8 to 9 foot high. I couldn't reach the heads of it. I used to have to pull a plant over to get to a head. So quite tall, obviously laying flat on the ground. You're trying to take all that material in as against something that's standing up where you're harvesting at sort of 4 or 5 foot high. Is a much easier process to harvest. So in order to get all of that monoculture crop, I had to go really low, and yeah, just painful. Just a lot of spiral chokes because we run a conventional front. We don't have a belt front, so just a lot of chokes on the spiral. Just lumps of too much material sort of gathers in, and then it moves through in one blob as such, or one block, and it chokes things up. So it was certainly more difficult to harvest the monoculture, no doubt. But you know, I guess we're farmers, we're used to those sort of headaches. Would it have stood up better if it was a multi-species in that particular block as well? I don't know. I guess that's an argument you can always have, but you never really know the outcome of. I think the storm had a major impact on it ending up like that, but equally so, the fact that it grew so well and was so tall is problematic. Any year where we grow up, we get a tall crop of that, which is called sugar drip. And it's just a forage that we grow. We keep the seed and sell it on next year as you know, planting seed for someone else. So it's sort of like a sorghum, but grows a lot taller, and just an old open pollinated variety. So as far as the feel good thing regarding, you know, I mean, look, it's always nice to harvest something where there's another living plant in there rather than the monoculture that was obviously, and I think Tamzin had shared some photos prior to where you could see the crusting in that monoculture crop. Obviously, we normally, that one there, we normally don't get big, ugly crusting like that unless it's exceptionally wet, which it was. that's fairly uncommon for us to see it that bad, but it does happen, no doubt. But yeah, that's kind of why that was looking so ugly compared to the other photo where the greenery and all that was through it. That's probably actually the wettest paddock that we have, the previous photo, and it gets a lot of water running across from the neighbours and further upstream on the floodplain, so it does tend to cop a hammer in that one. So have I answered all your questions, Tamzin, or not? Maybe not.
Well done, Russell, because this is the first time we've done this, everybody. So that was extraordinarily good. Fantastic. Well done.
It was like speed dating on steroids. It's like, how do I talk enough about this photo here, and how do I get to, hang on, we're over here, no, we're back there.
Unfortunately, I wanted the whole video, so yeah, it would have been it was too long, it was too many megabytes, but I needed to actually have a lot more of the monoculture in there. It was all very multi-species biased, but if you want to see a proper version of that, go onto Russell's playlist, and I think it was something to do with comparing the monoculture with the multi-species. You'll find it on there anyway, and the video quality will be much better. But wow, okay, so did we go through everything? So yeah, it was a lot. I liked the fact that you said, when you harvest anything, to have something living as well is always a much better feel factor. Rob and Kevin, have you got anything else to add? I know that you probably have lots, but yeah, so I've just sort of channel you down that thought.
Yeah, well, we've tried back-to-back cropping, and it doesn't seem to work where we are because we're in a low rainfall. I know I've heard the argument about, like that if you have a plant growing, it puts moisture in the soil. Maybe so, but it also takes moisture out of the soil. I know you got to pick the right plants as well, the C4 plants, but yeah, it just tends to dry the subsoil out, and if you put your winter crop in after that and you have a dry finish, well, the result can be pretty devastating, really. So I'm a little bit my mind's a little bit numb to think of other things at the moment, so perhaps Kevin should say something.
That's okay, but that's a really good point, Rob, because that is the thing that comes up all the time, is about that moisture retention, Kevin. And so I'm presuming when farmers are switching to this multi-species farming, that they're having to deal with the consequences of having done it with monoculture year in, year out for decades, possibly. And of course, the soil's not functioning as well as it will if they continue going down the line with the multi-species. So how do they just make that crossover bit with what Rob was just saying, with that initial part that's going to dry out too quickly in the early days?
Almost like I knew this topic was going to come up. So this is where some of the pictures that I sent over. So in eastern Saskatchewan, in the picture here, so this is us planting green. So this is a winter triticale crop that overwintered. And so we're going into our spring seeding season, which, we're growing our crops during our summer, which your winter. So this timing is very similar. So, the concern with this scenario of having something that is growing when, the ground, and right now you go outside, the ground is thawed, the snow is gone, things are starting to green up, and having this plant growing in the background here is using water. Absolutely. And so the 1 year I let this get a little too aggressive. It was about this time of year, and the forecast was about a 60 kilometer an hour wind, and it was going to get into the 32 degrees Celsius range. So for us, warm. And so I thought I had this cover crop growing, awesome. But it's going to protect my soil. It's going to stop the evaporation from the wind, but the transpiration ended up biting me. So if it was a strictly cash green crop, it would have definitely bit me. But when we get normal rains, and this is where when we look at these multi-species, so underneath our cash crop, what we want to do is, when we're getting into this, go with really low plant density. So we're looking at 5 to 15 plants per square meter. So it isn't a green mat underneath it. And as we ease into it, so when we have something like this, so this is underneath it was a hay crop. Well, okay, here's another one. And once again, the really neat thing of being in Australia and seeing what you're using, you can identify all the plants in all of the blends that we have and the plants growing. You can identify them because it's the same species. But when we look at it, and once again, when we're looking at this plant density, you look at it, you say, geez, that's useless. Okay, so we have the brown residue for armor. We have the green there as armor. When we dig up that plantain plant, and we dig up, well away from that where the plant is growing, we can see what the root systems are. And normally when we have these low growing plants, our root to shoot ratio is incredible. So it will, take in a larger area of the soil. Those roots are what is gonna build our soil aggregates. It's gonna build our water infiltration. It's gonna have our microbial population, all of those things. So it isn't the fact that we have to have, a lawn out there. All we need is to have plants and not a huge density. There was a corn grower, maize grower, south of Winnipeg, Manitoba, so heavy clay. In through the area, we get about 300 mils of rain during growing season. And so, Tamzin, if you bring up the corn, the wide row, so one of the things that I suggested to this dairy farm south of Winnipeg is to seed a cover crop, high legumes, in with his corn for silage. And if you've ever grown corn, people say you should never have any competition. You have to keep it clean. Well, when we put in so it was subterranean clover, Persian clover, crimson clover, along with a little bit of Phacelia, in with the corn. Went in with conventional herbicides, sprayed it, and what he did is about a 10-hectare spot of where this cover crop was underneath the corn, and then the rest of the field was no cover crop in the corn. What they found is where the corn had the cover crop between them, there was no cracking of the soil because they're dealing with about 80% clay soil. So there's no cracks in the soil. The corn plants grew an extra 40 to 50 centimeters taller, and the cobs were longer. And of course, when they were silaging it, he got out to the field when they finished silaging that, and they were into the conventional, so they couldn't compare yield. But if you have a taller plant with a bigger cob and all the leaves are green right to the bottom, there's something to it. So it, as Rob said, it is picking the species. It's picking the density of those species you put down. When do they grow? How do they grow? And we need to match that up to create synergies to make the system move forward. It's when we throw in a lot of brassicas. If we threw brassicas into this mix, which are nutrient scavengers, now we have competition. So we have cover. They're high water users. Those are all negatives, and it's going to bring our system backwards. On the flip side, so going back to the other picture of the little radish plants growing into the stubble, that's when we went in with an airplane, blew that on when our cash crop was starting to mature. And so that was seeded 4 weeks before harvest with an airplane, and now with a drone you could do it. Harvested our cash crop. This is growing underneath. So once again, it's not huge density, but it's just having those plants there so that we can have that green growing plant to continue having that armor and that ground cover.
So the photos that we're looking at, is it the first time that these farmers have done this ground cover scenario?
It was this guy.
All right, these are your photos, Kevin.
Those are all off of our farm in eastern Saskatchewan, and the whole thing of when I was doing this is, before I waste someone else's money, I'm going to try and waste my money, and so that if someone says I'm going to go and I'm going to do this, I'll be able to tell them, conditions are, so I subscribe to World Weather. Drew Lerner has an agricultural meteorological company that does consulting. So I subscribe to his newsletter, and and he was really good at that 6-week forecast, so that if they were forecasting 6 weeks of drought, the seed stayed in the shed. If they were saying that there's going to be a weather system coming in and bringing in, 20 mils of rain, then I was go out there broadcasting seed, or let's get small seeds and get things going. When people come up and they say that it's too dry to seed a cover crop, the question I ask, is it too dry for weeds? If it's too dry for weeds, you're right. But if weeds are growing, there's enough moisture to get those weeds started. So if the weeds can start, we can get a cover crop started.
But isn't that going to take away from the cash crop?
Species? What species? Are you dealing with synergistic plants? What's the growth periods of these species? So if you were going to introduce, you're going to be growing wheat, and you're going to introduce a warm season species at the same time, well, it won't work, because when the soil's cool, when the nighttime temperatures are cool, the cool season is going to take off, and it's going to really suppress or even kill that warm season. If we go in right before harvest, that 3 to 6 weeks before harvest, and blow on while we still have the moisture, we're going to have that microclimate underneath their canopy. We blow on that warm season cover so that it kind of germinates and has that microclimate underneath that cash crop that you have. You harvest your cash crop, and now you have the sunlight, and now that warm season will be able to take off and continue growing. So it's just different strategies, knowing what species. So if we're growing a wheat crop, and if we want to seed something in with it, seed in these annual clovers. Because when you look at nature wants to grow grasses and legumes together. They're synergistic. Once again, if you go into an established alfalfa field, it's going to be really challenging, because that alfalfa, or lucerne, the lucerne's already growing. You see the cash crop into it, and if we don't set that lucerne back, then we're going to have that competition. So it is staging. It is this big picture stuff. When we look at Colin Seiss's program, he goes out and seeds it when his perennials are starting to slow down and go dormant. Then he seeds in the cool seasons, the winter actives. So then he's naturally removed the competition to add more plants into it. So it is these strategies, and it is getting your brain around what's growing, when is it growing, when is it maturing, when is it using water, when do I have water, all of those things to create this system. And that's the biggest thing when I'm talking to producers, is developing a system for themselves. Because how Rob's going to do it and how Russell's going to be doing it, there's going to be different strategies, different climate, different tools, different crops are growing, all these different things. So it's developing systems, and have to think of these systems approaches.
Does anybody want to add anything? Because I've got 1,000 questions. I am the interrogator. Rob, do you want to add anything now, or Russell?
Yeah, you're right in what you say, Kevin. I mean, I wrestle with this issue every year, undersowing and stuff like that. I mean, obviously there's cost involved in doing it, because if we have hot, dry summers, probably more than 50% of the time it doesn't really work out as successful as you want it to. I see that picture that you had there with the green growing amongst the stubble. So really all you're doing there is just got a low percentage of plants just to keep the biology of the soil alive, rather than actually, because the stubble's providing the ground cover. When we plant a warm season crop, is that we usually let the moisture accumulate. I don't have any pictures for this, Tamzin. I'm sort of forgot about this one. So we only seeded at 5 kilos. So it was a kilo of sunflowers, a kilo of lab, a kilo of cowpea, and a couple of others, safflower and millet. That's right. So, and yeah, it grew really well that summer, and I actually I harvested some of it, and the rest of it I actually ploughed in, put some soil amendments on and some trace elements and ploughed in as a green manure. And I thought, oh, right, I'll have a really good crop next year. And it actually didn't work out to be a very good crop, because even those 5 kilos a hectare had just taken so many nutrients out of the ground. And because I used guano on that crop on its own, and it was terribly phosphate deficient. So there was a lot of phosphate stored up in those plants. So it was a bit disappointing in that respect, but that's nothing to do with the actual system. It's just to do with probably the management, and I wasn't aware of how deficient I was in phosphate and nutrients as such. So, but then I'm thinking about, like, years and years ago, how we used to have a lot more melons grow, and because we were doing a bit of ploughing then, that's when we were incorporating the lime and rejuvenating the soil as such. And I always remember where the melon was, because where the wheat crop come up, well, when I harvested the wheat crop, I had these circles of wheat, and they were a little bit taller and they were more dense. Then I realised that's where the melons were that we ploughed in. So, sure they used moisture, but obviously, I'd cut it off at the right time. It didn't affect the wheat crop, but there's a whole lot of nutrients that the actual, whether it's the tryptophan from the acetic acid, what's that word? Acetic, anyway, what those particular types of plants do. So anyway, it's beneficial in that respect. I mean, I wouldn't do it on a grand scheme, but it just illustrated the point that, the weeds were there, and they're a C4 plant, and what they were doing to the soil. So,
and that's the reason why some of those pictures, those low density blends that I have, you see the plantain and the chicory in it. Plantain and chicory are natural calcium and phosphate accumulators, and so when those leaves die and they rot, they're going to be bringing P and calcium up to the surface, and because they're highly mycorrhizal, they're going to be linking. Mycorrhizae are beautiful things, so that when we have this low density, and once again, it could be 2 plantain per square meter, which means so in order, I'm going to go back to pounds per acre. So with 0.2 pounds per acre of plantain, that will get you 1 seed per square foot. So that's about 10 per square meter. So 0.2, that's lots. You can cut that way back. And by having that, when we're growing that wheat, or any of the other crops that we're growing, if they're mycorrhizal, those plants that we're growing are going to tie into that plantain and chicory and share that phosphate and calcium with this plant that we're growing. So we're using nature's intelligence of sharing and bringing up these nutrients. And the whole thing of, when I was in WA, I was with Blythe Kellen, and we were going through and we were looking at these melons, and she was saying about the farmers spending so much money trying to kill it. And I said, why? It's growing in the worst part of the field. It's creating ground cover. The reason why people are killing it is because that's not what I planted. But these plants, once again, these weeds are telling us something. What they're doing, they're trying to fix the soil. And once again, you go
the other reason they kill them is because that they block up the tines. There's a lot of tines used here. So if you're using discs, that's no problem. I hear what you're saying there. Yeah, true.
No, and that's the other pain factor in there. So how do we get around that? Well, okay, so if we want to get into this, the building of soils and allowing the weeds to grow, okay, so that means we're forced to go into using disc openers. Do we want to go there? The economics, the time, that's the direction we're going to end up, going if that's the goal that we want to do.
Yeah, because obviously when you're having crops back to back, there's a huge amount of nutrients stored in that residue, and it probably takes 12 months before that's all released again, depending on the conditions. So you're right in what you say, that there's a lot of nutrients there, but they're actually tied up, and then they're not going to be released for that next crop. It's going to be the crop, the year after or whatever like that as well.
By having this green plant, this is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to have more root exudates. We're going to have more biology active for a longer period of time, and we're going to build a saprophytic fungi. This picture is beautiful. When we have saprophytic fungi with bacteria, they have to consume the plant material in order to break it down. Where fungi, they do their digestion through the release of enzymes and acids into the plant material. So that does not tie up nutrients. Whereas if you waiting for bacteria to break down the plant material, it always ties up, excess nutrients. When we have good fungal components and we have living roots and we have, now all of a sudden things start breaking down quicker and we develop these nutrient cycles that really start compounding positively. The other thing that I'm playing around with producers here, and it's not because I dreamt of it, is, guys like Shorty Fensky playing around with stuff, is using lucerne pellets instead of using fertilizer. So it has all the nutrients that plants need, the microbes need. It's all carbon based, so that this way you don't have the interactions with the Mulder cycle. So we don't have calcium binding with our phosphate and zinc and a few other things. It creates a very a positive nutrient cycle in our system. And it's really interesting how the microbes, Dr. Zavala out of the Chinook Applied Research Association, she's done some microbial work in the furrow where they put alfalfa or lucerne pellets. I keep going back on my translations. But
we do
as soon as we
use
put the lucerne
as well, Kevin, we do understand
that. So when we put that in the furrow, it's amazing how the biology just explodes. And so, okay, I don't have lucerne pellets. I have these pellets, or I have, so for horse people, I have beet pellets. It's all nutrition. And so if we know what nutrition's in that pellet and it's going to be tested, and we're adding carbon, what a huge jump ahead we do for plant nutrition, for soil biology, for remediating soils, tying up some of the salinity issues we have. These are all of the potentials that we have when we start changing how we're doing things.
How does that compare with the cost, though? Because I know how much a bag of alfalfa pellets is, but compared to NPK, how does it fare?
So when we have to do the science math on it, so assuming at best we're going to get 50% utilization of our nitrogen when we're buying, chemical nitrogen, when we start looking at buying chemical phosphate and realizing that we're only getting 10% of what we're buying, all of a sudden that $1,000 a ton, we're only getting 10% of it. So now you do the math backwards, and what did it cost us to get 10% of it? So you start throwing lucerne pellets in, and if you're talking about a 20-kilo bag, or you go in with a 1-ton bag, prices are different. So you start talking about a truckload of it, pricing is different again. And so once again, we're adding carbon. We're adding it in a balanced ration, so we're not just adding NPK or S, we're adding all of it in a form, in a balance that plant needed, which now the soil can use.
Yeah, because the other thing to consider, it's probably a multiplication factor, is that the best fertilizer for a plant is another plant. So that's what you're actually doing. You're giving the residues from alfalfa for a food source for a new generation of plants.
Absolutely. And so, the next question is, okay, so there's other feed pellets. So, there's weeds that are pelletized, and people want to avoid them because you don't want to introduce weeds. But as soon as we start balancing our soil, building our fungal to bacteria ratio in the soil, now we're growing, we're developing an ecological system that is favoring our cash crop. And the really easy way to see what we're farming for is having a refractometer and checking the Brix level of our plants. So in crop, And so you get a garlic press, you have this little refractometer, you take some sap of a plant, you squeeze it, and look through this little telescope, and you see where your Brix level is. And once we get over a reading of 12, our bugs and our disease and our weeds start disappearing. And we've seen that in Western Canada over and over again, where we've been putting down, managing for our crop instead of managing for weeds. So the more tillage we do, the more synthetics we use, the more herbicides, the more fungicides, we're going to end up with more and more weeds. And if you don't believe it, we've been farming for a long time, and the weeds, when we first started farming, when they started showing up, and we got rid of them over 50, 75, 100 years, whether it's tillage or herbicides. No, because nature doesn't want bare soil. So with low Brix, with low vigor of our plants, and we keep trying to keep these plants alive, what's happening is, we just keep perpetuating these weeds, and they keep on coming because we are developing a system for the weeds, not our cash crop. And so, doing this Italian ryegrass and Persian clover underneath the barley crop. Okay, so we know with those plants, they're in the reproductive or vegetative stage. So those roots are continuing to grow. As they grow, we're building mycorrhizae, we're getting root exudates, we're building the system. Whereas, when if you drive across Western Canada or the States or Eastern Canada or Australia, or when harvest is done, the best management practice is to keep it clean, because we don't want to steal moisture from that next crop. So my buddy down at Indiana, Jimmy Evans, great guy. We should get him on too one of these days. One of the things he's done is he was seeding his irrigation pivot. He took his cash crop off, was seeding his cover crop, and he ran out with about 1/4 of a hectare left. And he works with 2 soil scientists that monitor his soils. So he came out right before freeze up, and they went out to the field, and the 2 soil scientists went to this spot where it's black, there was nothing growing. They punched down 30 centimeters, and they just did a quick test of the moisture. And what they found was where there was nothing growing, in the top 30 centimeters, there was more moisture, about twice the moisture of where the cover crop was. And Jimmy said, okay, that's nice, but these roots are going down about just over 1 meter deep. So, you got your punch truck, let's go down 1 meter and test. So they punched where there was nothing growing. They punched where the cover crop was. Where the cover crop was ended up having twice the moisture where it was dry, or like nothing growing. So where there was nothing growing, there was more moisture in the top 30 centimeters. But where there was cover crop growing, those plants, once again, the micro water cycle, Walter Yene, great stuff. So these plants are growing, and when the nighttime temperatures start dropping, the air starts cooling down, but the leaves cool down quicker. So now the moisture will condense on that leaf. That leaf will then be able to either absorb that moisture or have it ball up and fall onto the soil. When it falls on the soil, it will then follow the roots down deeper into the soil profile. If the plant absorbs it through the leaf, what it's going to do is it's still photosynthesizing, so it's going to release that as a root exudate, which is moisture deep into the soil. So if we can have moisture stored down at 1 meter as compared to only having it in the top 30 centimeters, that's going to help with our drought resilience. So I hear what you're saying about the drying out the soil. It's absolutely true if we don't have these deep tap roots. And this is where having, chicory is half the size of plantain, but I love its taproot. And so if we can go in and have, 1 plant per square meter of chicory in our paddocks, and we're going to have, these plants going to flowering and potentially going to seed. But if we can have that 1 per square meter, really low density, it does amazing things to storing water. In Western Canada, for the organic producers, we go with lucerne, and once again, 1 to 2 per square meter. Not huge numbers, just a little bit of lucerne in there, so we can have that taproot going down, so we can have the mycorrhizae, we can have the end fixation. I'm talking to a lady in South Carolina, and she was talking about sandfoin. It's a species that is just starting to get talked about in Australia. I love sandfoin. Little bigger seed, nice pink flower, so a little more diversity. So it makes the neighbors really talk and ask what you're doing. But it's an end fixer. It has a really deep taproot. It tolerates lower pH soils. It once again checks off a lot of boxes, and it's really easy to manage. Plus, it's anti-bloat. And hangs on to the leaves longer than what lucerne does when it gets hotter and drier. So check.
Yeah, I've never grown lucerne or alfalfa, as you guys call it. But so what you're saying is that it's the actual density of plants. So if you've got like one lucerne plant per square meter versus I don't know 10 or something like that, because that's got a really deep taproot or really deep root system, it's going to use a lot more moisture there. So what you're saying is it's actually about the exudates from the sugars from the roots actually putting the moisture back in the soil rather than actually the plants actually looking after itself for each one to get a certain amount of water for each plant
at low densities. If we go in, so for lucerne, I would be looking at about 200 plants per square meter versus one. So 200 plants per square meter is going to use way more water and dry out the soil quicker than one. So it isn't about the density; it's more about the diversity. So if we have a little bit of a taproot, and if you don't like lucerne, what else can we use that grows maybe shorter, still has a nice deep taproot? I know in England they use a lot of comfrey, so playing around a little bit with that. When Haggerty's over here, I showed them some yellow blossom sweet clover, which is something that they use a lot in the very arid parts of Western Canada. Which, there's a lot of times where in the growing season, we'll go through with 30 millimeters of moisture in the whole growing season, and yet the sweet clover, year in year out keeps providing feed. So it's going through and looking for
There's something like safflower. I mean,
safflower.
That's got a deep taproot. That's a pretty incredible plant. What that'll do.
I love safflower, and now they have some spineless safflower, so this way they don't have that little pointy thing on the end of the leaf, so that when you're walking through it, you rip up either your legs, or if the animals try eating it, it gets away from some of those issues. So there's a bunch of great species out there that could be using, once again, low density and helping develop the system for our operations. And it may be where with technology, maybe we have a permanent strip of perennials within our field, and we can either seed between them or manage between them.
Is there a way that you can prevent the ground cover from going to seed before you harvest, or it doesn't matter because it's lower?
And so this is where, once again, philosophically, people will start getting a little too rigid in my mind. And so, when the zero-till people say, "Oh, I'm zero-till, and I will not till any of my soil." Well, if it turns out that the cover crop is getting a little too aggressive, maybe we go in with a narrow opener if we have a shank, and we knock that back. Do we go in with some herbicide that is going to then take allow that cover crop to get knocked back, or do we look for species that I'm thinking about our conference that's coming up, so I'm going through and so if we can have a plant that grows and if we can have something green through November, December into January, and then it just runs out of steam and dies, now we don't have to worry about terminate. We don't have to worry about it going to seed. We don't have to. So it is picking around with some of those things. But on the flip side, with the subterranean clover, the Persian clovers, the crimson clover, you guys have that full season that they will produce seed, reseed themselves out. And so this is where, okay, so do we manage it with tillage? Do we manage it with haying? Do we manage it with grazing? How do we manage it so it doesn't go too far? But the nice thing with legumes have the advantages when we have low nitrogen available to those plants. When we have lots of legumes in our system, and this is the great thing of these lupins that are going wild and volunteering and fixing all of this nitrogen in the soil. There was a lady up at Geraldton. She was saying about these. She went into this one area, and these lupins were just rank. They were waist high. They were just out of control. So she went in. She slashed them. I can't remember if she rototilled them in or not, but she said the next year was it pigweed? Just went crazy. And I said, well, it's a nitrogen scavenger weed, and it's being triggered by all of those lupins that you worked into the ground. You didn't have anything growing, so the biology broke it down, triggered, nature produced a plant that is a nitrogen scavenger. Bang, that's the reason why your weeds are growing. So when we have so if we would have seeded more lupins into it or lucerne or some legume, it wouldn't have done well. The weeds would have taken it over because we had too much nitrogen. They lost the ecological advantage. If we would have seeded canola in there, if we would have seeded beets, potatoes, some of these nutrient scavengers, it would have been absolutely a lovely crop. So nature will balance itself out.
Maybe there's so maybe there's a place for measuring the carbon nitrogen ratio so we can determine what we're going to actually plant next then.
Absolutely. And do you have to measure it, or do we look at this field, this paddock here, where you have the radishes and you have some grasses in there? What's thriving? And so in order to grow a radish that size, when I was working with Steve Groff, he started up Cover Crop Solutions, and he developed the tillage radish. So he has a chart to tell us how many pounds or kilos of nitrogen that it takes to grow a radish that size. So wow. I get a pretty good idea of where we are C/N ratio by looking at what's there and what's thriving from that last crop, especially if it's multi-species. So that if we have a multi-species and those legumes are thriving, that tells me the nitrogen's low. If the brassicas are doing really well, that tells me your nitrogen levels are really high. If the grasses are doing the best of the bunch, okay, we have enough nitrogen supply in the system that the legumes are doing what they do. They're just getting enough nitrogen over to the grasses, but not to the excessive, so that the brassicas start going crazy on it. So, but absolutely, when I'm looking at ratios, I'm looking at your carbon nitrogen ratio in your soil and the residue, and I'm looking at your fungal bacteria ratio, and that's by you telling me what weeds are growing.
So, yeah, Rob, the photo we're looking at here, did you terminate this ryegrass, or did it die on its own?
No, that's just what come out the back of the header. That's all. So, yeah, I'll just put that up there for ground cover. If you could go back to that one with the radish, please. The one we just looked at, we're talking about.
Sorry.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, that was crimped, obviously. That's on a really sandy soil with a CEC of 3. So I was quite surprised how well that radish grew. It had no legumes in it. I do put legumes in with the radish now. But amazingly enough, the following wheat crop, that was doing 4 ton in those areas there, with 19 units of nitrogen, and it was quite astounding, and it was so even, and it was the best germination I ever had. And so I've been told that when you grow brassicas, like with tillage radish and canola, that there's a hormone, tryptophan, and that converts to indole acetic acid. So that's why things do so well. Like even after canola, that's a brassica. And so tillage radish, we're finding that the more we put tillage radish in the operation, we get less and less weeds, especially broadleaf weeds. The wild radish is disappearing, so it's pretty exciting, really. So it's all about picking your plants.
Absolutely.
So, Rob, are you finding that your weed component is not an issue anymore, or less of an issue?
Well, in that particular paddock there, I struggle to find any broadleaf weed to spray like in the crop. I mean, my son still did it anyway. I wouldn't have done it, but the thing about it was that any of the broadleaf weeds that were in there, and like even the tillage radish, there was a few that obviously had come through. I don't know whether it was just a carryover seed from the year before or whatever it was, but I checked the bricks levels of them, and they're only 3. And they're crawling with red mite, so they wouldn't have done anything anyway, and they weren't doing anything anyway. They were just there, but they weren't really competing. They weren't going to grow taller than a wheat crop. So sometimes you get a little bit carried away about trying to have a billboard table like in a crop to keep it nice and clean. You just have to actually go out and look at the actual situation and see how the weeds are doing, and because that's how it's supposed to be. You fertilize, well, you set it up so you actually the cultivated crop, that's a higher order of plant, so that's going to thrive on certain conditions, whereas the weeds, you set it up so that the situation is not as good for them, so the insects go to the weeds and not to the crop. So that's how it's supposed to be. I thought it was pretty exciting, really.
So do you plant your multi-species with a tine?
Yeah, well, we've actually got a disc seeder. It stayed in the shed last year, and we with that particular paddock, that was actually seeded with a disc seeder where you got the stubble residue. That was multi-species there. Hang on, that might have been wheat. That's right. So we just find that our soils just seem to respond, like, because we got pretty old soils in Western Australia and don't have any volcanic soils, and anyway, they just seem to respond with the time. That little bit of oxidation, it just keeps things rejuvenating things. Whereas if you have a disc, I use the quotation that someone else has said that you've got to earn the right to use a disc seeder. So, but in some paddocks, I have earned the right, but there's lots of situations where we find tines still to be better. Like with a disc seeder, you actually have to put it onto moisture, whereas a tine seeder, you can go in there and the top can be sort of semi-dry, but because capillary action, it pulls the moisture up. So, you could talk for half an hour the pros and cons of disc versus tines, but I know there's lots and lots of people who've tried disc and they'll go back to tines, and they haven't earned the right to use a disc, but they thought that by using the disc, the soil would get softer. In effect, it actually gets harder because you're not doing that little bit of oxidation or stimulation of the soil. So, and there's the chemical incorporation, and probably shouldn't be talking about that, but it's reality that we still do use some of those things. So, and they're also like the tines, because what I do is I actually spray fish and molasses and any biologicals with the pre-emergent, and then covers that what I've sprayed on. It covers the residue plus the biological food source, and then so it creates an environment where the residue that's underneath that bit of soil there, it starts the digestion process. It just helps the decomposition a lot quicker, because otherwise, if it's left standing in the air, it takes a lot longer for it to digest, and it oxidizes, and you lose nutrients in that respect. So, and like even 3 to 5 degrees is all you need to just do that on an angle. You'll see there's one picture there with that. So you only have to do that every second year. You can see just on the slide angle there, and it makes a huge difference, because the tine, when you see the crop just slips between the tines, and it doesn't look like it's even been seeded. Whereas if you see it on the same run row, or same GPS row as what it was the last year's previous crop is that it seems to build up in front of the tine, and you build up 2 or 3 plants, and then it slips around, and so you got more chance of it making a mess of the paddock. Whereas if you do it on an angle, it just slips through nice and clean, and you only have to do that every second year, because obviously the following year, well, you just do it back on the straight again because the crop was seeded on angle. So we find that works quite successful.
Russell,
Yeah.
let's go to this one. Sorry, I've been firing questions and not including you.
That's all right. I can handle rejection. It's all right.
You did such a good start as well. So anyway, thank you so much for being patient. Will you be growing more crops like this? Have you got a better understanding of what you need to do going into the future? Will you be still choosing multi-species? But I know you talked about the companion planting, so I thought we'd just go down that line for a little bit with Kevin here as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, I don't have a problem with that crop that we grew there. That picture, no real issues there with trying to grow something like that. But I think for us, what I'm planning on doing this year, and Jill Clapperton's coming out apparently, so going to try and put some things in there that are of some interest to her. But a couple of years ago, we tried putting down some medics and clovers and that as we planted our wheat crop. And I think one of the whatever you call it, the blockages or the things that are stopping people doing that is we've also got to be mindful of weeds within our cropping system. And I know the end game is that you want to try and include these things so that you stop the weed issue happening. But when you're starting from where we're starting from, we've got all those problems. So we have to deal with that sensibly as we go along. So I think for anyone in this general area here, the issue for them planting a cover crop underneath, like undersowing under a wheat crop or something like that, is partly obviously the moisture issue. But the bigger problem is if they're going to control the weeds within that wheat crop, they're going to take out a lot of those things they established. So, and that was certainly my experience. I put those things like the clovers and that under the wheat. They established, but then I did have to go and do a spray for weeds. Obviously, because being a seed producer, you need to produce clean seed. That's the next stumbling block. So what I'm going to aim at this year is actually we've got a little spreader that we can put in our spray rig. It's what people over here generally will throw out their mouse off or something like that across their paddocks. So my plan is this time I'll establish the wheat and we'll come back in at a later stage and try and spread those sort of things after we do a weed control, so we're not taking them out. I guess that pushes back their ability to compete with the crop too much at the other end. It sort of slows that process up, but hopefully establishes some sort of a green cover, towards that point where the wheat's starting to finish off and obviously into the summer. So that's the approach we're taking this time. And I think that whole weed issue for most people is as big a problem as being worried about the moisture loss. And I'm not certainly not arguing with what Rob's saying. I think Rob's nailed it in that for a lot of us, I mean, for us over here where we are in Queensland, you get these extended periods of exceptional dry sometimes where there's just no rain for 3 or 4 months. And then unfortunately we get these, big dumps of rain, which we have to catch as well as we can. And it just makes that whole decision-making process and, executing it and getting it right. I mean, no one can tell me now what the next 6 months are going to look like. So it's a bit of a punt as to what you're going to plant when and how you're going to make, what it's going to look like at the other end. But adding on to that, I think, and Kevin was talking about it, this moisture at depth. So the top 300 mil was dry, but deeper was wetter. For us in our black soil, the way I always view moisture in our soil is the top foot is the easiest to replenish. The hardest for us to replenish is 3 foot down. You don't do that with a 10-inch storm in overnight. You do that over time. You build that moisture. So we're very conscious of our moisture at depth, more so than what's happening in the top 6 or 8 inches or a foot. I know we can't establish a crop if we're dry on that top foot, and all of those things come into it. But definitely, if we can retain that moisture at depth, it doesn't take us anywhere near as much rain to top up that top foot of moisture. So, to have a cover crop in there, if if we're losing moisture in the top foot, but we've got good moisture at depth, I'm far more comfortable with that than I am the other way around. If we've got no moisture at depth, we're in a hole of pain. It takes us a lot to wet that ground up. So, I mean, Rob was over here in, what about October, Rob, wasn't it? We did that water infiltration test at Jimba in the middle of a wheat crop that had cracks big enough that Rob was worried he was going to disappear in one of them and never come back. And we did that water infiltration test, and it was a bit of a surprise to you how slow it was, eh?
Yeah.
Because
your soil is so fine with the silt, it actually just got less air spaces, just tightly combines together.
Yeah, like I mean, many years ago when my grandfather.
Too much magnesium, Russell.
Too much of a lot of things that aren't right over this side of the country, I'm telling you, including the operator. But my grandfather, like he was doing stuff for the Wheat Research Institute, and that he was helping do a lot of trials and also producing seed wheat back in like the 50s, 60s, 70s, and they pretty much had a trial plot on his place for most years, and they did tests on it all and said really the most amount of rain that we can handle per hour over a long period of time is like 15 mil or 60 points in the old scale. That's what we can actually successfully over a long period of time take in that soil. Now, that was probably looking at the conventional farming system of the day, how that changes and looks when we start to get things turned around and better and, get the soil functioning better. I mean, it'd be great to think that the ability of that soil has changed in the way it can take moisture in, but we're a long way off saying that we're anywhere near where we probably should be. But I think for Australian farmers, the challenges are the same for everywhere. I get that, but we've just got to get away from this idea of thinking that all plants that are in there as a companion or whatever are taking moisture away from the crop that we're trying to grow, and that there's no long-term benefit. I suppose we have to balance that out between, okay, we might lose a bit in our crop, but what's the long-term gain? Are we going to get to the other end quicker? And therefore, is it worth that cost as against not going there? And that's kind of my approach. I can live with losing a bit right now. I mean, money's a big thing. Obviously, we have to survive. Otherwise, we're not going to be here talking about it in 10 years' time. But equally so, I think money doesn't improve the situation if all you're doing is mining your country all the time either.
And one of the things that when we talk about the weeds is I look for what weed control options do we have, and what these cover crops are tolerant to that herbicide. So I think you guys have bromoxynil over there. And so it's not a great broadleaf herbicide, but it takes care of your wild brassicas, and so it is tolerant. The clovers are tolerant of bromoxynil in your cover crops. So we have to look for, and once again, it's not going to be tested in potentially in Australia. We have to do some Google searches, finding out what are they using for seed production, weed control in some of these species. And then what can we use in our crops to make it safe? Because if we rely on the chemical companies to do it, they're not going to do it, because number one, this is going to reduce the amount of chemical they're going to use long term, and it's such a small market that they're not going to spend the money on it. So there are some weed control chemical options, and which cover crops are going to be tolerant, which ones are going to be susceptible. When you throw hand grenades, there's going to be some collateral damage. So absolutely. So we try and develop this system that if we know what weeds are coming, what chemicals can we use, what cover crops can we use with that chemical program to transition from the conventional to more of a regenerative type of production system. So, and as a seed grower too, we can't have weeds, we can't have contamination, we need purity, but how do we get it more so the multi-species work for us? So absolutely, keep it up.
So I could ask a final question, and it would be a fairly brief one, hopefully. Does it matter whether you go in full hog and go 15-way multi-species. You're not going to make any money from it, but you're there just going and just having a look, or combining it with your cash crop, like Russell's just indicated that he's growing his wheat, he'll spray, and then he'll go in and sow the ground cover. Is there, like, I know there's not a quick fix, I know it's all to do with context and everything like that, but if you're really passionate about it, can you just go for it and do what Russell did, and then he came back and did the cash crop within the actual multi-species? Or does it just not matter? It just is, as long as you've got the ground covered, hunky-dory, all is good.
Depends on your money. If you need the money, you can't really go on multi-species like we did, and I'm happy to do it, but there was no financial benefit in that at all, that one that we crimped. So if you've got the finances, yeah, go for it, and you'll certainly get some benefit. How long-term does that last? I don't think it does long-term. Like one crop's not going to make a huge difference over 10 years. You have to be able to keep going with something like that. So for us, my take on it is I think we go more companion cropping that hopefully will work, and that hopefully doesn't need grading out of the system, so that we don't have to grade our seed to get rid of that crop or that seed off that crop if it does seed. That's the approach we're taking. But yeah, happy to live and learn, because I think it's changing all the time for me. Yeah.
Good answer, Russell. I like that one. Who's next?
Yeah, I'll probably be going halfway, because I've tried cover crops as such, but yeah, as Russell was saying, we actually used to plant them, and if we had rain, we harvested them, but if not, well, nothing happened to it. So anyway, what we do now is the third of the rotation is multi-species in the winter, which we obviously harvest for the dairy. So we got the mixture of all the plants there together doing their thing in the soil, and then obviously after it's harvested, well, we just rely on the ground cover there to protect the soil during the summer, and that's a big thing, obviously, protecting the soil, because it does lots of things, but obviously, if you've got loose, crumbly soil, you're going to hold the moisture, whereas if your soil's a bit tight and compacted, you're going to lose moisture there. Even if it is covered, you'll lose more moisture. So also comes into the chemistry and how you actually look after the soil has a big bearing on that. But yeah, keeping the soil covered, it's obviously got its downsides for tying up nitrogen and, chemicals and all that, but it's got lots of benefits, because if you've got it protected and covered there, well, you're looking after the biology rather than exposing it to the sun. So you just got to change your mindset as to how you get around going through the next year's residue, which is no real big deal anyway. We've worked that out. So yeah. So
and Rob, are you happy with your ground cover being a little bit of weeds as well? But when you're talking about the summer months?
No. Well, usually, if there's the odd weed out there, we don't have a, like Russell, he's got a, what do you call it, camera spray, but we don't have that. But when you get rain, obviously everything comes up at once. So, yeah, we can't spray it. But if there's the odd weed out there, we don't usually get too worried about that. One part of the farm, we actually adjust sheep on that. That's on the other block. So the neighbour comes through after harvest and puts the sheep through there, and it sort of always makes me feel good, because his sheep always do well when they come across to our place. You can see by the actual the composition of the feces, and they always put on weight. They always grow. They always do well. So that's a bit of a feather in our cap, I suppose you could say. But there's any green weeds there, well, they come and chew them off. But obviously they're not going to be killed. They're just going to be slowed down a little bit to when we get close to the cropping.
So you're adding wealth to your neighbour's sheep.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Another good answer, Rob. Oh, Kevin, you've got some living up to do here.
the easiest way to justify cover cropping, and so if you do take that, that year sabbatical off, and there's critters in the area, once again, Rob you don't have critters, Russell, you don't have critters, but there's usually neighbors with critters. So if you grow a cover crop and invite the neighbors over to do some grazing, maybe get some money out of the grazing, cycle nutrients, control weeds, build soil biology, that's the easiest way to justify these covers. To go in and to have, once again, low density, diversity in the mixes, something green growing for as many days as we can. That's where things start happening. The plow down that you did, you see that initial kind of a jump, and then because of our chemical reliance, it starts petering off again. So then we have to go in and do something else with it. And so one of the things, once again, Steve Gruff, what he was doing in Pennsylvania was growing earlier maturing crops so he can harvest them earlier. So then he had more of a window to see the cover crop after harvest. And so once again, we're growing, full season crops. What happens if we go to something earlier? What happens if we, change our harvest date so that we're not using all that moisture? So we have that, create some value for that cover crop. And his rule of thumb is if we can get one good cover crop in our rotation, that will pay for 10 years of cover cropping. Wow. When you look at nutrient cycling, bringing up calcium, water infiltration, all of these things. So yes, I don't like failing. No one likes failure. But when we go in and we have success 1 or 2 times in 10 years, which sounds really low odds, it's like a weather forecaster. But if we can have 2 out of 10 years where we have a successful, good cover crop, that's paid for all those 10 years. Wow. So it's a, once again, mindset. It was a failure. It was a failure. Well, what? And once again, if it was a failure, why did it fail? Okay, lack of rain. Oh, okay, we rolled dice. But if it keeps failing, what blend are we using? What species are we using? What rates are we using? And that's when we're in Dunedoo, we did up a workshop there. And one of the growers, I developed a spreadsheet that I can figure out the seeds per square meter. And he was at 1,600 seeds per square meter. If you put that, you get a 1 meter and you put 1,600 in there, that's way too many. So, it's knowing the seed size, it's knowing, all of these things. So it's putting it in, managing the risk, managing the costs, and, keep learning and, doing, what you're doing, keep doing it, keep pushing, make it work.
Fantastic.
Can I just ask, add one thing to what Kevin that just tweaked my memory there, that 25 years ago or something like that, because we used to put millet in. I used to love growing like a summer crop and harvested it, but that's all before we started, going down this, biological chemistry road and all the rest of that. So I did notice one thing that like when we had rain, the start of the autumn rain, so that the soil actually wetted up a lot quicker. So because of the foundation of the roots and the biology that was there, the actual it took the moisture on board and it wet the soil up a lot quicker. So that was quite profound there.
Yeah, that everlasting effect. Fantastic. Right, well, we're going to wrap up, and all I'd just like to say is you guys make my life very prosperous. You bring wealth and a great Sunday session feeling to my Sunday, but also my following week. So thank you so much for your presence and your knowledge, and you're also beautiful. And thank you everybody who's watching, all of our members. Until next time, see ya.
Thank you. See ya.